Hi everyone, my name is Rahul and I lead merchant integrations team at PayPal. Today I'm going to talk about a really interesting topic that I have been thinking about for quite some time, and that's API design using Chat GPT as a co-pilot. We've been through the ages where API design was something that we have learned by reviewing other APIs and looking at other APIs out there and speaking with our peers and enriching our knowledge, ultimately with the goal of making API and integration designs better. But now with ChatGPT, we have a unique opportunity to really have an AI assistant that will help us continue to improve and be available for us 24/7, almost as a co-pilot. So I'm going to talk you through this and let's see where it goes. So when I think of API design, I've always thought of it as part art and part craft. And the artistic part of it has got to do with just thinking creatively about what's the right solution to the problem, how can you make it more elegant and more functional, how do you really think deeply about naming the fields in your API, or really thinking about what your resource names are going to be, what data formats are you going to be, are you going to lean towards making it developer friendly or standards driven, and making all these choices with the whole point of making your API seem very elegant and functional. The other aspect of it, which is sort of a little bit less appreciated, but for people who can tell, there is a beauty in looking at an API request and response and really appreciating the nuance and the creativity that has gone in, right? And collectively, you can really say what aspect of it really makes it great. But as a whole, you can look at some really great API designs out there and you can tell that somebody has really put thought and care into it. And as a package, it comes together as really elegant, simple, and easy to use. And fundamentally, the whole point of great design is it's intuitive, right? So a developer looks at it and he or she immediately gets a grip of, what is it, or what they should be doing next, what's the right sequence of action. So it just feels natural and easy. The craft part of it, right? So really comes from the technicality of skills, right? Which is you still have to operate within the whole idea of HTTP standards, REST principles, authentication methods, JSON schemas. Right, they're just, you cannot disassociate yourself from the reality of how APIs are built. And so I think the technical skills is something one has to appreciate as part of good API design. Just as you have to appreciate how an iOS platform or an Android platform or the Safari browser works differently to come up with a good UI design, you just have to understand some basic principles to really design your API for optimal use. And the second is, the whole experience and expertise around it. Uh, Over time, the art translates into a craft, right? And you sort of lay down your guidelines, lay down your principles, and what you have really is something that you can bank on, right? A lot of you can relate to that building the first API is the really hard part, but then incrementally adding to it becomes a little bit less challenging. And then as your company has more and more APIs, there are familiar patterns to go back on. The best, most successful designs always marry the two, right? And sometimes, there is a push um, to more on the artistic side, and sometimes it becomes very mechanical and it becomes a craft. Personally, I have always seen it more as an art and a craft. I leave sort of the craft to my engineers, architects, and people who are sort of more versed in it. And so, as a product manager, which is what I am by trade, to me, it's always been about art. But really, I think it's when product and engineering and architecture and other teams come together. I think we have really a great blend of art and craft. So that's how I've always viewed, and a lot of people view API design. This has been my personal journey, right? So I've been in this space for quite some time. I lead a team of PMs, but A couple of years ago, I was an individual contributor, and my approach to API design, as I just mentioned, was more on the artistic end of things. And so to me, I would, somebody would leave me with a problem on a Friday, and either I'm like sleeping at night and thinking about it, and I would wake up in the morning and say, okay, you know what, I've figured out what are the right API endpoints, what are the right naming conventions, what's the way to really think about this end to end, right? So it could be like literally in my dreams, or if I'm on a walk somewhere, or I'm exercising, something that frees my mind of like the everyday stuff and get into a point where I'm really focusing and thinking very, very creatively about the whole topic. Now that was one phase of the journey, right? As I kind of got into a mode where I was advising and reviewing APIs with other people in the org, right? That's sort of the next step of the journey for a lot of people, right? Like you get really good at, you get the basics, you sort of really think deeply about it, and then you get invited to forums where you're really expected to share your opinion and help others get better API design. And so that was sort of the next phase of the journey. And on that, I relied a lot on peers and understanding their perspective, and you sort of build this really holistic, great model of not only thinking the way you think, but how others think, right? And that sort of takes you on the next step of evolution on API design, where you are really able to combine and really even critique yourself as if one of your peers is reviewing it. And the final phase, which is sort of where I've been in the last 2 or 3 years, is really to be training and mentoring PMs in my team, PMs across PayPal, on how they should approach API design, particularly from a product lens. So that's sort of been my journey. And this has come with a whole bunch of challenges, because really scaling from being an individual contributor where sort of I'm in charge of my destiny, to then now having to come to a forum and give immediate opinions on what an API should be and give concrete suggestions, to then being able to train and be asked by any member of the team on my approach on myriad of APIs they're working, really takes a lot, right? And I don't have the luxury of going back and hoping that I wake up in the morning and have all the answers. I'm really expected to give advice on the spot. And so if I look at my world today, and for a lot of people who are pretty senior in their organizations, they have been asked, everyone from their SVP to a junior PM, on a whole host of topics, right? So on any given day, I could be walking in the office and someone would stop by and say, hey, look, Rahul, how do you think about how can all of our customers use the latest APIs that we put out there? I might have a PM pinging me and saying, hey, I really need your help brainstorming a field name, and can you help me pick one over the other? There could be a conversation that my PM would be having with an engineer about what's the right HTTP status code. There could be someone else who could be like, hey, can we help me think about KPIs from a new APIs, at least help me get started on something. And we might be building a new server SDK, and we are looking to see what are some of the key considerations. So as you can imagine, it's a whole gamut of problems, and it can be incredibly hard to get into a meeting with all five of these folks in a single given day, expected to give absolutely the best advice, which then they will take on and actually iterate on. So there's a whole lot of responsibility when it comes to giving the right advice to people. And so to me, it's this is a big part of the job. And the way I have been doing it, quite honestly, at this point is really, I feel like my head is a large language model, right? It has a simulation of all the past design mistakes I have made, all the design guidelines that I have seen, like going to conferences like this and really sinking in how others think about things, really looking at how competitors have approached the problem, look at all the design patterns out there, and so much that just comes with years and years of experience. And I can go into this mode of what if and think 10 steps ahead better than anyone out there. But that comes with a price, right? Like I cannot scale, I get tired, I can bias. There's it's a human brain at the end of the day, and so for simple things, it can be really tasking. It's really hard to come up with some good opinions. But this is where I feel like a co-pilot like ChatGPT really changes the game for a lot of us, right? Because it's based on pattern recognition. It's quick learning and adaptable. You can feed it information and it can learn at a rate that's almost impossible for a human brain to learn that fast. It's very consistent, right? Like you can be up at midnight talking to it. You can be up at noon after a lunch, and it's just works the same, right? It doesn't have all the baggage that comes with being a human to some sense. It has the speed, it has the scale, it has this an immense knowledge base, right? It's very hard to compete against it, right? Like even for me to watch all the videos that Apidays has ever produced and comprehend it and then translate it into some guiding principles, I'm relying on connections in my brain to really fire at the right time to put those things together. Now, there is value in it from a creativity standpoint, but from a sheer retrieval of information and thinking about different things, ChatGPT, I feel, is just way out there, right? And I feel like that's what the topic of this presentation is about: is how as humans, who have over time built this knowledge, can really now start working with something like ChatGPT that has this amazing properties, and how can we really merge the two. So the key ingredients for success is, in my head, are really two things, right? Like these are things that humans can do. I don't think ChatGPT can do it, which is you have to be intrinsically curious. Anyone has, if you notice anyone really good at what they do, they are inherently curious. And the curiosity leads them to ask questions, as to say, hey, why is this field name like this? Why would we choose to call our endpoints the way they are? They ask why a lot. And so I think that's an intrinsic question. And the second part of it is, being able to ask the right question, right? So if you're curious, that's great, but you should also be able to ask the right question in the right moment. And to a lot of people who use AI tools, that's prompt engineering. So imagine, learning to use Google for the first time. You would notice that there's some of your coworkers who were just so good because they were able to figure out the right queries to use in Google. Now, everyone in the world knows how to use Google, but you can tell the different people, some who can really use Google really, really well because they can ask the right questions, and Google has eventually figured it out. So it's becoming more better, even if you yourself are not that great. But the thing here is you need to be naturally curious. That is not something anyone can teach you, and you need to be able to ask the right questions. So to me, if you bring that too, I think you can use an AI as a co-pilot to your maximum advantage. So if I look at API design and building API products, or even building integration products, so it doesn't have to be an API all the time. It could be an SDK, it could be a web, mobile, server, however you want to build it. It always follows a typical product development lifecycle. You have a discovery phase, you have a design, you have development and deployment. Now, in my head, where product managers such as myself and the team I lead play a big part is during the discovery and design, where you're really thinking about the problem, you're thinking about what's out there, what's the research, what's the persona, what's the business case, all that things, and then coming up with a blueprint of a high-level set of epics, your endpoints, some mocks, right? That lay the foundation of something that the engineer can then take on and the team can take on and build. My focus is going to be today on discovery and design. There's enough content out there with using GitHub and other as co-pilots, and so I think engineering as a whole has been on this bandwagon of using AI tools. So I'm not going to cover the development, deploy, and learning launch part of it. I'm going to focus more on the discovery and design to really get to the point where you can now offer something for developers to go design. So here is an interesting problem statement that I thought will be meaningful. We are all going to be in Paris. The place where the croissants are as great and as popular as anyone can imagine. And I'm sure in the audience and for the people I'm going to meet, there's got a lot of API geeks, who want to know, hey, what's the best croissant in Paris, right? Like a lot of us are traveling from places other than Paris, and I'm sure all of us would want to try croissants at a bare minimum. So imagine completely hypothetical problem, of finding the best, building an API that helps you find the best croissants in Paris. Where would you even start, right? And I'm going to show you how something like Chat GPT is really going to help you. What I do have in our slides are some of the prompts that I'm going to be using, so you can always go back and refer to it. And I'm also going to talk about not just how to build an API to find the best croissant, but I'm going to also use, if you have an existing API, how do you go about improving it? So with that, let me switch over to the ChatGPT interface, and let's try to build together what an API like this could look like. All right. So with ChatGPT, you could very easily prompt it to say, hey, literally what I just did. Like, I'm going to meet a lot of API geeks in Paris. They would want an API to find the best croissants in Paris. What potential API solutions can I build? Right? This is very common. You would walk into a meeting, or you would have your salesperson or your PMs come in and say, look, I think we probably need an API like this. What are our options? Now, before ChatGPT, you'd go back and really think deeply about it and come back in a day. You really do not have to do much of that anymore. You could just ask ChatGPT. And as you can see here, it has pulled up a bunch of APIs on location, everything from, we can offer something that's location based, something where you can rate and review, something that even brings up historical and cultural information about croissants. I never would have thought of it. Um, Something that related to the user generated content. So with just a prompt and just a conversation that you would have just heard, you could just type that exact conversation in, and it can start thinking for you. And for me, something like this is super powerful because I just instantly get a spectrum of things that I can poke in mind. Oh, do I really need something that's location based? Should I be focusing on the history of croissants? What's really going to help me really get that solution up to? Now, the next thing, once you have sort of a mental model of where you're going to do, is the competitor research, right? So the prompt that I put in was, hey, what are some good examples of providers who might offer an API uh, on who has the best croissants in Paris, right? Maybe there's somebody already out there, right? Like this is kind of stuff I would have typed in Google, hope to find some Medium post or somebody's written an article, or maybe go through like 20 links, put together a page, and then put together something that I can share with someone. But not anymore. I can just ask ChatGPT the question. It can actually list out potential APIs that I can use. And that, solves so much of the aggregation problem, right? Like, well, now I have a group of APIs that I'm sure I would have found had I looked hard enough in Google. But you have a list of APIs here that you can follow through. Now you can take this forward and you can say, hey, you know what? I think I really like what the Yelp Fusion API is. Maybe let me take a little bit deeper and say, are there other API endpoints who offer similar to the Yelp Fusion? And then it can really start putting together a table for you on different providers, what typical endpoint. And if you start noticing, obviously nobody really going to have an API to search for the best croissants, but it's smart enough to understand that you could use search endpoints, or you could use something similar to it to really find the bakeries that might have the best croissants. And then you can keep going a lot further and saying, hey, look, can we uh, you can try different things. So now I think initially it was just more about, hey, what APIs can I use? Now I'm saying, okay, what APIs can I use to look up the bakeries? And this is where if you can see, it's getting really, really smart. Not only is it giving me APIs, but it's also giving me keywords that I can use to really use in those API endpoints. So within minutes, we've gone from a problem statement to really having an outline of what our competitor is doing. And it's very clear that if you're trying to build a niche API to look up the best croissants in Paris, there isn't one that exists, but there are generic APIs. So you can probably tell that, if you have an audience who is a croissant connoisseur and really needs an API, you have a market because nobody else is really solving it in that particular way. Now, once you have sort of broad understanding of what the market is, next step is, who are you building for? Now, obviously, you don't want to build for yourself, but let's say you have a meeting coming up with your customer in a month's time, or how am I going to get a feeling for what they may need? And so this is another area where ChatGPT really excels. You can prompt ChatGPT to say, hey, look, for the duration of this session, imagine you're someone like myself, right? Like someone in his early 40s, two kids, really fell in love with croissants back when he visited Paris a couple of years ago, and now really wants to, is really known as being a judge, and really he tries to eat croissant in every city he goes. And when you give ChatGPT that instruction, it almost sort of takes on that persona, right? And at that point, you're really then talking to a person who is really a croissant connoisseur. And you can assume, or you can ask ChatGPT to take on any persona you want, right? So imagine you're going to meet a customer that you've never met before, but you know that he or she has a background in a particular language, they work in a particular industry, they any characteristics that you can get. And if you want to really think about what might be important to them, this is a great way to model and keep your brain thinking. Because when you go into meetings, you need to be prepared, right? And it's very hard to do it if you're not prepared. This is a great way to really live up to your persona. And then you can start asking questions, right? Hey, now that I have trained you to be a croissant connoisseur, how would you like to search, right? What's important to you? And look at the brilliant answers ChatGPT is going to come up with. Like everything from recommendations to craftsmanship to freshness, appearance, the variety. Like it would have taken incredibly long time to really think through this, right? And it would have taken a lot of customer interviews to really get to this. Now, it's not to say that it supplements everything that you would have to do anyway, but at least you have such an enormous starting point because ChatGPT already has the patterns and the information to really come up with this. And so this really helps you get a leg up on persona. And you can then ask them, hey, great. I mean, I love that you would want to really think about finding croissants with certain criteria in mind, but what sort of APIs would really help you, right? Because that's sort of the ultimate question. And it can, assuming that persona really give you an insight into what sort of inputs or what sort of APIs would really help that particular person. Now, if you've done this, at this point, you're really ready to, you say, okay, I'm convinced, right? Let me now try to get my engineering involved and write some high-level epics. A lot of PMs really struggle or they really find it boring or taxing to write epics. They could avoid it in all their life if they want to. This is where ChatGPT can help you, right? You can tell ChatGPT, hey, write me an epic in a particular format and look at some of the amazing epics it's going to pull up with. It's able to figure out different personas. It can talk about what are the typical use cases. Now, of course, you as a good product manager, an engineering manager, or a tech lead really need to comb this down. But the leg up that you get in just thinking about, okay, I can be everyone from a food enthusiast to a traveler to a blogger to a local resident. All of us have some needs, and they would all want to be users of something that will ultimately use our API to find the best croissants in Paris. So I think you can see how powerful that it gets. And I can get to the next level by even asking it, hey, what endpoint should I consider? Right? Like all of us can, think of like CRUD and most of the basic ones. But what you have here is really a whole gamut of API endpoints, everything from listing, searching, filtering, reviewing, authentication, favorites. So it gives you a ready list of endpoints, and now you can work your way through it and narrow it down to things you want or add things that you didn't find it. But just having up with 10 endpoints in a matter of seconds, it would have taken someone a really long time. So I think this is one way you can get from an epic, right, to an endpoint, and then you can take it one more step and you can say, hey, look, now what field should my API contain, right? And you sort of got a hint of it with some of the prior questions, but here is, a sense of, okay, what's the location? When are they open? Are there any pictures? What's the contact information? So it can give you a sense of what API endpoint or what fields we should use. You can even take it a step further and say, what error messages should I consider? Like these are things you would eventually be able to narrow down on, but it's good to have a sense of, what is it that's going to be. This may not be the most useful because you're really looking at field level errors in a lot of cases, and there's a lot of complexity there, but still better than not having anything at all. And then finally, it can say, hey, just help me visualize this, right? Like I'm going into a presentation or I'm going to have to show this to someone. Just generate something to get the brain starting, right? To have a stake in the ground. And it could suggest an endpoint, it could suggest a fields, it could suggest a possible sample response. Uh, if you're really trying to iterate quickly, brainstorm quickly, if you have these prompts, you can really go from 0 to 50 in half an hour or even less, right? And imagine this in the hands of PMs who are just starting out their journey or PMs who are just learning the ropes. This is immensely useful, right? Even for engineers, even for architects, it does make your jobs super easy. So hopefully this illustrates to you, even though it's a fun example of trying to find an API for croissants. I'm not really sure if anyone's going to ever build it, but it can give you the promise of what is possible using Chat GPT. Now, switching gears a little bit, right? Like we don't always build new APIs every single day, right? It's far in between, but you may have a lot of APIs that you've built over the years, right? I have built APIs over the years that if I reflect back now 5 years from now, I'm like, oh my god, what was I thinking, right? And so here is an API request, and I'm just saying, hey, you know what? I have some time. I did this work 5 years ago. Let's say if I were to do it today, a fresh pair of files, what would I do different? Right? And you can ask ChatGPT, hey, rewrite this API request to make it more clearer and explain to me what changes you would do. Right? And it's just a very good brainstorming exercise to some. You could feed in any API request you get, and it can tell you, hey, here is a revised version, and here is the reason are things that I would change, right? Like I would rename a particular field to something else. I would make things more descriptive. I would clarify a whole bunch of things here. So This is a great exercise to try out on your APIs you have already, right? Because for us today, if someone were to look at all the APIs and over a career of 3 to 5 years, you probably would work on 50, 60 different APIs. And to really have to go back and reflect and think about, hey, what's the next version going to be looking like? If I ever have a chance to do it, this is a great way to think about what could you do. Now, there are things that you could change today, right? Like you would be looking at a description and you're like, hey, this is not making any sense. Or you have written a bunch of descriptions, and over the years, different product managers, engineers have worked on it, and you look back at it and it seems like the API now is not consistent, because every new person that has touched it has come up with their own way of writing the descriptions, and taken together it makes no coherent sense. And you can now use Chat GPT to say, hey, look, rewrite these descriptions for me to make it more clear, more readable for a junior developer, right? You can actually tell it what persona to use. And it can rewrite the description. And if you were to look closely, the Chat GPT is so much better than the version we have. So it's amazing at rewriting things in English. And if English is not your first language, there's nothing as better as Chat GPT. You can also use it to improve your error messages, right? Like we have a bunch of error messages that over the years have been put together by many PMs, many engineers, and you would all hope that there's governance in place and everyone's really looking at it deeply, but inconsistencies do creep up. Tone changes. It's really hard to be on top of these things when you're in a fast-moving cycle. So if you want to really reflect back, you can ask ChatGPT, hey, look, here's a bunch of errors. Can you rewrite this for a consistent tone and clarity? And it will take that in and it will make the changes. It will make all of them consistent. It will have the same sort of a syntactical approach to it, so much better, right? Like asking a human tech writer to do this for all the errors that you have is going to be an exercise that you'll never get. And this is a magical way to get it. And you can imagine a developer could take it with the tools he has and even convert it to a PR spec much more simple. There's a lot of tool available to even do that. You can take the same information to APIs and improve the fields, for example. So this is a Twilio example. This is not from PayPal, where I was saying, hey, just think about how you would rewrite this API. And Twilio, as you can imagine, and a lot of APIs tend to follow a very flat model where it's like a kitchen sink of all fields ever. Some people prefer that. Some people prefer organized. You can ask ChatGPT the question, and it says, hey, look, the way I would do it is, group related information. I would organize information in a chronological order, make it consistent formatting. So there's a bunch of stuff it did, which was very hard for me to imagine. And you can tell it to say, give me 5 examples. So you'll have 5 things to compare with. I think the speed and agility with what it can do, you still need to be the judge, but the ability to do it far surpasses what any human can do. And finally, this is what most people use ChatGPT for, which is brainstorming. And in the context of API design, right, it can really help you take a look at your API request, take a look at your responses, and really help you restructure it. And we talked about this a little bit ago, but it can tell you what it did, why it did it, and it helps you really look through tons of examples, like at PayPal, and I'm sure at all other companies, like thousands and thousands of examples. It's nobody's ever going to go back and take a look at it again, right? It's just there's so much work that's continuously happening, but this is a great way to just speed a lot of these things up and help you think through what are the things you could make it better, and if they are worthwhile, you can then invest the time and resources. So hopefully this gives you guys a good idea of how we can really use ChatGPT to achieve these amazing things, which previously would have taken us as humans an inordinately long amount of time. So switching gears, back again, we covered how to go from something as a small problem statement as finding croissants, and I have prompts that I use for purpose of this, and you can use the same for by changing a few things here. And we also talked about how do we improve existing APIs that we have. Now there are some challenges, right? Everything has a pro and con. With ChatGPT, the responses do evolve, which is sort of good, but sometimes it evolves for the worse. Um, it is like learning a new search engine, right? So it's imagine your early days of Google. There are few people who really figured out what's the right thing to type in, and so prompt engineering is a big part of the whole story. You need to approach the results with some healthy bit of skepticism. Just given the knowledge base of ChatGPT, if I fed it the latest API request from PayPal, it would course correct me back to the things that we deprecated 2 years ago, right? So it's not smart because it cannot tell the difference and its knowledge is stuck in time. But I think those problems will disappear over the years, right? So you need to know something. You just cannot be completely oblivious to everything. Um, for extremely creative tasks, which are like completely novel, nobody really has ever done even remotely. It's limitation, but it can give you a leg up that I think nobody else can. But it is not without its flaws. And as you can imagine, it's only as good as what's trained on, right? Like, and that's true for human brain as well, right? Like, if I've never been really exposed to API design reviews or really thought critically about field names, of course, I'm not going to be able to have an opinion on it. But you have to understand that its knowledge rests on it. And you can imagine a world with some of the latest announcements where someone could build a chat GPT for API design that really takes in all the information, maybe Apidays has gathered, and they can launch their own custom GPT in the future, right? That takes into account all the things we've been talking. So there are challenges that you need to be aware of as you use this tool. Now, I'm a big believer that AI is going to be huge, right? And you cannot ignore it. And I was recently in a seminar from MIT on generative AI, and there's a very interesting comment that was made, which is you're not going to be replaced by an AI, right? That's sort of what a lot of people think in their minds, particularly that doesn't don't use it as often. But you can bet that you are going to be replaced by someone, a human, who's going to be using an AI. If I were to compare two groups of people in a company, a PM or an engineer who does everything like they used to be doing pre-GPT days, to a human product engineering manager, tech lead who's using AI as part of everything they do, almost as a co-pilot, like the way I'm explaining, you can bet that one person will outsmart the other by a long mile. There is no comparison. So, you need not fear an AI, but you need to fear the guy who uses the AI all the time, right? And the best example is, you know, imagine someone who never uses Google to someone who uses Google all the time, right? We cannot have a repository of information. We need to look out for fresh ideas. And so I think ChatGPT takes that to a whole another level. And so I think it's something that I'm cognizant of. I advise my team to be cognizant of. And my message here is for all of you that start tinkering along with it. Early days, but you will help shape what it could become in the years to come. Thanks all. I think this has been wonderful. I'm going to be enjoying being in Paris for this. Uh, to help people, I'm going to be launching a book soon on ChatGPT prompts that's going to help an API PM. It's certainly going to help anyone who thinks about APIs more from a product perspective. It will build upon the kind of things that we just talked about. But I'm going to be continuing to be sharing in the community, right? So the intention is to get everyone involved and start using ChatGPT or Bard or whatever your favorite AI tool is going to be. If you are interested in talking more about it, I have my Calendly link. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can pre-order my book. There's a lot of ways you could get in touch with me. But hopefully, this session has inspired you to really try out your first ChatGPT form for thinking about API design or anything about API. Or even if you're listening to a speaker and you don't really get it, ask ChatGPT. Most likely it'll give you a much more concise, better answer than what you're even hearing. That's just the nature of AI. But this has been amazing. Thank you all. Be in touch, and uh, I'll be seeing you shortly. Thank you so much.